Hello, Lena. Welcome to Mr. Quaker's Teachers. Now, in this lesson, I'll be giving a detailed analysis of Edward Thomas's poem, Rain. It's part of the poems for the GCSE or IGCSE for 2023 to 2025. I'll speak about the themes in the poem, the figures of speech, the point of view, the poet's tone, the mood. That's how, as readers, will feel about the poem, the structure, and other poetic and stylistic devices that Thomas uses to strikingly present the experience of a pouring, relentless night rain by the poetic voice. Essentially, I'll try to prepare you for any questions I'll be giving to you, either in the GCSE or any other exam where you'll be required to write on the poem Rain. Let's dive in. Now, let me begin by speaking about the poet, Edward Thomas. His full name is Philip Edward Thomas. He was born on the 3rd of March, 1878, and he died on 9th of April, 1917. He was a British writer of poetry and prose. He is sometimes considered a war poet, although few of his poems deal directly with war or his war experiences. He only started writing poetry at the age of 36. Now, by that time, he had already been known as a prolific critic, a biographer, a nature writer, a travel writer for 2 decades. So it appears that he started writing around 16. In 1915, he enlisted in the British Army to fight in the First World War, but was killed in action during the Battle of Arras in 1917, soon after he arrived in France. So he died in war. So that's about a brief summary of Edward Thomas, the poet. Now, in terms of the poem, this is how the poem appears on your anthology. It's an 18-line poem, and then also has a free verse. So there's no rhyme scheme to the poem. It's a free verse poem. So in it, Thomas talks about his what happened in the midnight, where he hears this pata pata pata, and then the rhythmic fall of what he describes multiple times as wild rain. Which means that it's not something that was wanted, but it was just, pouring all night. And then ends the poem by speaking about what he was told by the tempest, which is like a higher, more severe form of rain. So for me, I see the multiple repetitions of the word rain in the poem, and also different variants of the same word death, dying, or all those kind of things. We see it multiple times in the poem. The dead, all those, and die, we see it in the poem. So I'm going to talk about that and what that is called in English language. Now let me begin by reading the poem, and then I begin my analysis. Rain by Edward Thomas. Rain, midnight rain, nothing but the wild rain on this bleak heart and solitude and me, remembering again that I shall die, and neither hear the rain nor give it thanks for washing me cleaner than I have been since I was born into the solitude. Blessed are the dead that the rain rains upon. But here I pray that none whom once I loved is dying tonight or lying still awake, solitary, listening to the rain. Solitary, listening to the rain, either in pain or thus in sympathy, helpless among the living and the dead, like a cold water among broken reeds, myriads of broken reeds all still and stiff, like me who have no love, which this wild rain has not dissolved except the love of death. If love it be for what is perfect and cannot, the tempest tells me, disappoint. So that essentially is a reading of the poem. Now if you observe, Thomas reveals his focus in the poem with the first word rain, which reveals that it's a direct reference to precipitation in liquid form. So we're not talking here about snow or sleet, it's about rain. Then after a comma that indicates a short pause or a slight pause, he provides information about the setting, right? And he tells us that the rain is midnight rain. So this is midnight. This is what's happening in the middle of the night. At midnight, 00 o'clock, if you're using the 24-hour time module. Now, midnight tells that the day had ended and a new day was only just beginning. So it's as if he had like a terrible day, and then the terrible day is entering into a new terrible day. So the time, like I mentioned, is 00:00. Additionally, the word midnight, an adjective, also shows that the setting was likely pitch black, since midnight is known as the darkest time of the night. Now, midnight also tells that his narration was taking place in the middle of the night when most people were presumably asleep. So these are like the literal, explanations or analysis of the word midnight. But we also have a figurative meaning as well, or a metaphoric meaning. Now, furthermore, it is possible that the poet mentions midnight as a metaphorical allusion to him experiencing the worst, most trying and darkest time of his life. That is, he was being bombarded by dark thoughts that had made him gloomy. So midnight is not only in the literal sense of the time, but then it could also be the of his thoughts, how dark his thoughts were, how dreary his thoughts were. Now, this explanation is important because it's a pathetic fallacy. So the weather and the environment are personified to create effect. So we see here that Thomas, in terms of the stylistic devices or figurative devices, he's using pathetic fallacy to draw the reader in, for the reader to understand that, see, this rain that we're talking about has an effect on the people that are there, in this instance, the poetic voice. Then, after a second comma that again signals a second brief pause, he concludes the line with, nothing but the wild rain. Nothing. Now, the use of nothing there implies that the pouring rain is the only occurrence at the time. That was the only thing that was happening at the time. That is, the setting was likely moonless, starless, windless, everything less. So nothing also suggests that the rain was the paramount force, the only present force and the paramount force, and was in total control of the night. Now, furthermore, Thomas's characterization of the rain as wild, he does that in the last two words of the first line. He says wild. So his characterization of the rain as wild strikingly conveys that nothing could be done to control it. It cannot be controlled. So it was unhinged. Think of like a wild animal. It was unhinged. It was loud. It was falling angrily, uncontrollably, in a beastly. That's why he uses the word wild. So in a beastly, untamed, orderless, and ferocious manner. The adjective wild also suggests that the rain is unwanted. Because if think of like something that is growing wildly, in most instances, it's not something that is planted. It just comes by itself or it grows by itself. So the use of the word wild there suggests that the rain is unwanted and poses a clear and present danger to those in the setting. It's a dangerous rain. Now let's look at Thomas's repetition thrice of rain in the first line. Now in the first line of the poem, Thomas repeats rain 3 times to emphasize that the pouring rain is the chief focus of the poem, is the main focus of the poem. His thrice repetition of rain also creates the impression that it was hammering down. It was hammering down and was the de facto ruler of the night. So he repeats rain, midnight rain, nothing. So he wants the reader or the listener to understand that the rain is the only thing that is in the night. It is in total and complete control of the night. It is unrelenting and relentless. His repetition of rain thrice at the onset of the poem also exposes that it is the predominant thought in his mind. That's what he was thinking about. And was in control of his thoughts. So not only is it in control of the night, but it's also in control of his thoughts. Now, Thomas's repetition of rain in the opening line also shows that he wants the reader to imagine it pouring relentlessly with loud, ferocious patter. Finally, his repetition of rain thrice also creates the impression that it was superlatively in control of the night. It was the only force that was in control of the night, whether natural or human. It was the only force that was in total and complete control of the night. He continues into the second line of the poem with enjambment. So you see that in the flow of words from the first line to the second. You see that there's no pause. It just flows. Right? And I think he does that for multiple reasons. He does that because he wants to show that the wild rain cannot be controlled. Nobody can control the wild rain. And it's all powerful. So there's no line break at the end of the first line or any punctuation mark to show that the rain was relentless. It is really wild. Nothing can be done to impede it. Now he begins the second line with the preposition on, which provides visual imagery of the rain unrelentingly drumming directly atop what he describes as this bleak hut. So it's on it, and presumably he is inside the hut. Now Thomas's use of this in reference to the hut creates the impression that he is in it and is pointing directly to it, while his characterization of the hut has bleak, presents it as a place of joylessness, listlessness, deariness, all those kind of ideas. Like, there's no joy. Furthermore, bleak is also very striking because it suggests that the hut too is morose and full of negative feelings. Again, that idea that I mentioned about the pathetic fallacy. So the hut itself, where it is in, the place where it is in, is also bleak. There's joylessness there. In fact, it appears that in the poet's mind, the pouring rain is creating a bleak future for all. A play of words there, a bleak future for everybody. In addition, bleak is also an effective adjective because it provides tactile imagery that suggests that the hut is cold. So, like if you're thinking about it like, personified hut, it's cold because if you're bleak, you're cold. And exuding misery. So misery is coming out of the hut. Bleak is also a pathetic fallacy that personifies the hut and shows that it has feelings. In fact, you're going to see that he mentions he personifies another, what we may think about as maybe an abstract idea like solitude. And me. So when I read this second line, I remembered one of the poems where, because I could not stop for death, where the poet says that because I could not stop for death, he, gladly stopped for me. In the carriage was he and immortality. So it's like death is there, she is there, and then immortality. So the personification of these ideas, so on this bleak hut, so the hut has feelings, and then there are other agents as well. I'm going to come to that in a bit. Essentially, the pouring wild rain has caused the personified hut to become morose and dejected. And since the persona is presumably in the hut, he too is affected by this misery. So he too is miserable. The hut is bleak and miserable. He too is bleak and miserable. After the word hut, Thomas employs a comma which again indicates a slight pause. So observe the use of pauses, slight pauses, especially in this second line as he begins to list. So that indicates a slight pause before adding, and solitude and me. The conjunction and signals that he's ready to introduce another element, while solitude is an allusion to loneliness. So, this bleak hut, and then there's personified solitude with me here. He's here. Look at him. So, and solitude and me. So, on this bleak hut and solitude and me is like we are all in the same sort of boat together. We're in the same place. So Thomas's tone, as he says, and solitude exposes that he's pointing and indicating that personified solitude is in the hut with him. Solitude is an idea that he repeats about 3 times in the poem, but we're going to see that. Moreover, the persona's reference to and personification of solitude this way creates the impression that it is a constant acquaintance, a companion, a friend. So think of it like a shadow figure that is always with him. It has never left him. In fact, you're going to see that he said he was born into this solitude. In fact, in some way, his claim and solitude and me suggest that loneliness. So loneliness is a synonym for solitude. Solitude is it's an older word in the sense that maybe it would have been more popular in Victorian English, but now most people will say, "Oh, I'm lonely." But then in Victorian English, it's likely that when you meet somebody and then they're talking about their loneliness, they'll say they live in solitude. Now, in fact, in some ways, claim and solitude and me suggests that loneliness is his alter ego. It's like a shadow figure. It's like this he has like dual personalities, but then one of the personalities, the literal personality, is loneliness. Furthermore, the persona stone, when he says "and solitude," also creates the impression that he has an almost Siamese twin-like attachment to the personified solitude. So if it's like Siamese, it's like he's conjoined to it. He can't break free from it. They are together. He cannot extricate himself from it. Solitude is a constant companion. I don't know if you're going to say friend or something, but then he can't extricate himself from it. Hello, learner. I hope you've enjoyed the lesson so far. This is a sample video analysis of this poem. To access the full analysis, purchase it or the entire course with